I now have the pleasure of introducing our commencement speaker and honoree, Lynn Luckow, and reading the resolution adopted by the Board of Trustees in acknowledgement of his many achievements. I am particularly pleased that in granting Lynn this honorary degree, we are not only recognizing one of that special breed of Renaissance man who, through his broad professional and personal accomplishments and activities, has made a difference in our world, but we are bestowing this honor on a former Fielding student. The resolution reads as follows, and you will excuse me if I just read directly from the page. I don't want to make the same mistake again. Whereas, as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Craigslist Foundation, you connected people and organizations with the tools and knowledge they need to improve the quality of life in their communities and neighborhoods. Whereas, as Dean of the Noyce Leadership Institute, you support science and technology educators in becoming change agents, providing them with the training, resources, and networks to sustain and advance innovation in their institutions and communities. And whereas your work with the boards of the Kinsey Institute increases the body of knowledge in sexuality, gender, and reproduction so as to enhance these fields of inquiry. And whereas, as transition President and Chief Executive Officer of Northern California Grantmakers, you provided overall vision and leadership to take the organization to its next level of performance, developing collaborative philanthropy in the region. And whereas, as an expert in nonprofit initiatives, you have supported more than 40 nonprofit boards, including the National 4-H Council, for which you were honored as the nation's top nonprofit board chairman in 2000 by the National Assembly of Health and Human Services Organizations. And whereas, in your time as Chief Executive Officer of Josie Bass Publishing Company, you did all within your power to further the aims of social justice and diversity in the workplace and products of Josie Bass. And finally, as whereas, this, by the way, is a very long, your area of influence is great, and you use that influence to strengthen organizational and technological networks which ultimately improve the lives of all people. Therefore, be it resolved that Fielding Graduate University honors you with its highest honor, the honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, as one who champions the highest ideals of community involvement and civic participation as the means towards a healthy, democratic society and world. President Myers, I am honored to present to you Lynn Luckow.
I love reading these words. By the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees, I hereby confer upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters with all of the rights, privileges, and responsibilities which here and everywhere pertain to this degree. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It should be obvious to you that they didn't let me edit that. I would have taken out a few semicolons. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Fielding entered my life in 1979, 1980, when first President Frederick Hudson came to the wilds of North Dakota. It seems he had a woman of fancy there. But we also invited him to be a speaker in a major conference on marriage and divorce. And he told me I could do anything. And I believed him. It's a pleasure to be here. Chairman Goldstein, President Myers, Provost Willingham, trustees, faculty, and of course, graduates. And also a welcome to your families who helped get you through and to this place. Thanks. I'd like to open a conversation with you today, and I say a conversation because I don't believe it's going to stay here. I think as we all progress, we'll take some action, and that would be my fondest hope. So Craigslist Foundation doesn't give away money. We give away ideas. We convene people. We connect people. We'll probably lose the word foundation at some point to make a point of who we are. Through the journey of Josie Bass Publishers and higher and adult education, continuing education, time in philanthropy and working with the nonprofit sector, I left Josie Bass in 2000. And I went away on reflection to think of what I had accomplished at age 50 and what mattered. And I was actually saddened to realize that creating a literature base for the nonprofit sector of books around what makes them unique, governance, volunteerism, fundraising, strategy, I wasn't as satisfied as I thought I would be. Not that books change the course of everything, but they certainly can provide a spark. And I realized that really our education systems, other than Fielding, of course, hadn't improved. I realized the healthcare system hadn't improved. Gangs had increased. Homelessness had increased. What was really wrong? Why weren't we able to get traction by an increasingly larger, more effective nonprofit sector? I came to a number of realizations and insights through that inquiry I'd like to share with you, and then to talk a little bit about the implications and ultimately what each of us in this room can do on Monday when we go back home. My first insight was that the nonprofit sector can't do it all. We expect too much of it, and one could even say that maybe the nonprofit sector has brought some of it on itself by saying that we can do it. One sector cannot act by itself. The second insight is that we suffer from sectoritis and siloitis in this country. It can be as basic as having 3 different schools within Fielding. On a more global scale, it's really that businesses are trying to improve communities, government is trying to improve communities, nonprofits are trying to improve communities, citizens are trying to improve communities. But we've lost our capacity to work together, to think together, to imagine together. We have a history of disciplines. If we look at a Harvard catalog 150 years ago, we'd find 40 courses, no matter what you were going into. And so we have segmented curriculum, we've segmented how practitioners work, how they think. I remember one of my most profound moments at Fielding when, do you still have a section called professional specialty? No? Well, I'm really retro then. We had a section called professional specialty, and as you can imagine, none of us could wait to get to that point where we had the main coursework had been completed, and we were unleashed to do what we wished. And I had a terrible time with it. And thank goodness for Will McQuinney. And through discussions with him, and I was the last one in my cohort to decide on what my specialty was. I actually had a dream one night and woke up and wrote it down and called Will the next day and said, I finally figured it out. My professional specialty is to be a generalist. And he said, that's fabulous. Because in this era of sectors and silos, professional and otherwise, we need connectors. We need people who can bridge and bring pieces together. The other thing I learned is that community is the organizing unit for the 21st century. For the 20th century, the organizing unit was the large organization. And I think we've learned that large organizations can't always succeed. That large organizations can become very invested in their own sustainability rather than the sustainability of those they originally came to serve. Community, for me, Brian O'Connell would have called it the invisible colossus, like a civil society, because it's all around us and we don't recognize it. We assume that it will take care of itself, that it will move forward on its own. And that's no longer true. With the amount of travel, no longer a need to stay in one part or one community, thinking globally, it's no longer true that communities simply take care of themselves. We must become intentional about building strong communities and neighborhoods. I also learned that democracy is an experiment. It's not a given. We can't take it for granted, and we do in this country. We have been told that to be a democratic person and a citizen of the United States, we need to do two things: vote and volunteer. That's not enough. We even had one major leader following 9/11 add to that list: vote, volunteer, and shop. I think the most disturbing discovery was no one's responsible for the public good. I looked around, looked at our institutions, our civic infrastructure, the silos and sectors within, and came away very disappointed that no one was responsible for the public good. We expect it to happen, and it doesn't happen on its own. So what are some things we can do about this? What are the implications? We must invent a new civic infrastructure that can leverage the internet and technology. We can no longer think that technology is bad. In a new civic infrastructure, we include the voices of all people. Our goal is to improve the quality of life for all, not for a few. So how much does it take technologically to ask people directly what they care about, what they see as the priorities for their block, their neighborhood, their community? It's actually quite easy to do. We just need to step up and do it. That the way we've worked before through supervisors and representative democracy is no longer working. We now have the capacity to go direct to people, and it's one of the arenas that Craigslist Foundation is taking on. We need to reduce bureaucracy. At the hands of Barbara Mink and Oscar Mink, I learned that bureaucracy is one of the plagues of our time. That bureaucracy unchecked, the rules of the game displace the mission. It's more important to focus on what you do and the rules and the processes rather than the end result. A good example is United Way, just around the corner from us. Brian Gallagher took over as president some 7 or 8 years ago. He went across the country and asked one question of every United Way he could speak with. What business are we in? And the answer came back with great consensus. And what do you think it was? Fundraising. He said, that's our problem. The pathway has become the end. We're not in the fundraising business, we're in the community building business. And how do we turn that around? We have come to great phrases, and as we used to say in publishing, never confuse language with reality. And one of the great phrases over time has been to think globally and act locally. And by saying that phrase, we think we've done it, and we haven't. We have not made progress on acting locally. And it is the locality, it is the hyperlocal where things happen. We need to share more about what works. Peter Drucker once said to me that most of the issues of our time have been addressed pretty well somewhere. We just don't know about it. Craigslist Foundation has started a new site that opened in April called likeminded.org, where people can share stories of success in their communities, whether it be something as simple as something in the neighborhood and on the block, finding out who needs a ride to the doctor at 3 o'clock on Thursday and getting them there. Who needs a federal van to come out and pick those people up? What are we doing in our own neighborhoods to be helpful and useful? We must educate the whole person and to think holistically. This is one of the greatest strengths of fielding, is that it isn't just the academic. It's not what Malcolm Knowles used to call the empty vessel syndrome, where we were just filled up with knowledge and then we were ready to go forth. It really translates into behavior and change and a whole person. We must educate for community stewardship and leadership. As we've gone across the country over the last several years and think about what it is that equals community leadership and community stewardship, I say to every sector, whether we have a business hat on, an educator's hat, a nonprofit hat, a government hat, or a citizen's hat, we also have a family hat. We also have a community hat. And we're discovering that the gap between one's professional education and background to get to community leadership really boils down to a few things. Facilitative leadership, or what Juanita Brown, Fielding graduate from the World Cafe, would call conversational leadership. People do not know how to engage others in a conversation that can lead to a partnership. People do not know how to collaborate. And one of the biggest surprises to me is that people are asking us to teach them storytelling. People want their voices heard. And Like-Minded is a place where voices can be heard, to document what's going wrong in their community, what they're doing about it, and what change was created. It also works for aspirations. Who's asking in our communities what people aspire to and what they would become engaged in to do? In terms of what we can do individually, we need to shift our orientation of asking locally, statewide, regionally, and federally what the government can do for us. That we must take greater responsibility for where we live, work, and play. Now, this may sound like a broken record from years ago, but this really isn't that difficult. The people who look at me with surprise when I walk down the streets of San Francisco and I actually bend over to pick up a Starbucks cup that's been thrown on the street, they marvel. In a civil society, we take care of things like that. We find who needs a ride to the doctor. We find what assets we have that we can give to others. I met with Virginia Hodgkinson and Bud Hodgkinson just before this, and Virginia handed me Mount Vernon at Home, the village-to-village movement in this country, Aging in Place, it's called, where people are going back to the barter system and finding ways to help one another in communities. It reminds me of the work of Peter Block and John McKnight, whose recent book, The Abundant Community, asks us not to go into a community and find out what their problems are, but to go ask what their gifts are. What are your assets? And the easiest way to do that is to ask the question, what would you like to teach? And what would you like to learn? That coming together as a society at the what we call the hyper-local level just doesn't seem chic or in, because it's not global. But the only way we will have a healthy, vital, democratic society is to have healthy, vital, democratic communities and neighborhoods. It starts at home, no matter how global our jobs, no matter where we work. We all have someplace we call home. Organizationally, we must move away from bureaucracy. We must become agile and flat. We must ask not about process and procedure, but to always ask why. Because once we know the why, the what and the how will write themselves. Why do we exist? What is the impact we want to have? The beauty of the nonprofit sector over the last 30 years, since the founding of independent sector, is that they are focused now more on impact. It used to be cool that you just existed because you were doing the work of a higher being. It's no longer just cool to exist. You must have impact and state what you would like a community to become, what you would like to envision it to be. For Fielding, I think it's very clear to continue to educate at the level of the whole person. In Kouzes and Posner's famous book, The Leadership Challenge, one line they wrote that really captivated me was, the primary instrument of leadership is the self, and therefore all self-development is leadership development. No one knows that better than the psychologists, the Human and Organization Development group, and the Education Leadership group at Fielding. That this really is our time. The opportunity is there for Fielding graduates and alumni and faculty and their systemic world that goes far beyond the numbers we see here, far beyond the 3,000 alums. It is a significant opportunity to claim community building as what you will do. You have the skills. You have the whole person education. You have degrees and tools and skills that relate to community building. You've been in an educational process that has brought you to a stronger reality and greater confidence in yourself in conversations, in bringing yourself to the fore without minimizing who you are. It reminds me of Parker Palmer and the influential work he's been in my life and many lives. And his book, Let Your Life Speak, really tells the story of what each of us must do to take who we are and our identities and bring them forth and bring them into community. Fielding is not a place where you receive a transactional education, where you put in X amount of time and you get a degree at the end. Fielding is a transformative educational institution, taking the whole person. Skills, warts, achievements, capabilities, aspirations to apply to improving community and life for all. I would like to leave you with a John Gardner quote, a mentor and a man who's been inspirational to many of us. And there are two central thoughts. One is, he once said that the challenge of the 21st century, and even though he didn't live into it, the challenge of the 21st century is wholeness, incorporating diversity. That is our central challenge, that we don't get stuck in our own orbit, that we reach out. Parker Palmer, in a book in the early 80s that I stumbled across called The Company of Strangers, said that one of the most important things we can do is meet strangers. Our society doesn't encourage that. We do it when we're on vacation, but we don't do it with our neighbors. That it's strangers who will stretch us, who will help take us to a different place. And John Gardner's final piece that resonates for me in this democracy and the importance of community building is freedom and responsibility, liberty and duty. That's the deal. Freedom and responsibility, liberty and duty. That it is our obligation as citizens and the freedoms we have to perpetuate freedoms, to build stronger communities and neighborhoods, to take care of the home fires. So I challenge you, graduates, faculty, alumni, and all gathered, to step up, help build your communities and neighborhoods. Bring yourself to that work. Thank you.
Dr. Luckow, thank you so much for your words, insightful, thoughtful, quite a challenge for us, and we will do our best in the future years to meet that. We thank you very much for your being with us, and we take pleasure and pride in your accomplishments. So please stay in touch. Thank you.